Welcome to The Explainer. You know, when we think about losing faith, we often imagine some big, dramatic event. But what if the real danger is quieter? Today, we're diving into a sermon that talks about exactly that, how faith can be corrupted from the inside out. And we're going to break down how that happens, and more importantly, how to get back to what the source calls simplicity in Christ.
God and us presents Proclamation to the nation.
Okay, so to really get this, we have to start with one single, powerful Greek word, phtheiro. Seriously, this word is the key to the whole thing. It means to corrupt, to destroy, to deprave. Think of it as this process that leads someone away from a state of holiness, not by some external attack, but by damaging them from the inside. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to tackle this in 4 steps. First, what exactly is this threat of corruption? Then we'll look at the original blueprint for deception. After that, we'll see how this stuff shows up today in modern false gospels. And finally, we'll get to the good part, the path back to simplicity.
Okay, let's dive into that first part, the threat of corruption. So what are we actually talking about here? Well, according to the sermon, the real danger isn't some big, flashy attack on faith. No, it's way more subtle than that, and it has one primary target, your mind.
Right. So the sermon really hammers this home. The main battleground is the mind. The real risk is that a believer's mind gets corrupted, that it gets pulled away from what the Bible calls a sincere and pure devotion to Christ. And listen, this isn't about someone just throwing their faith away. It's more about a mixture, you know? It's about adding in other ideas that end up watering down or twisting the original message. Okay, and this is where it gets super interesting. To really explain how this whole deception thing works, the sermon points us back to a foundational story. It's like the original blueprint for deception, an ancient pattern that, according to the source, is still playing out right now. And here it is. This verse is the absolute cornerstone of the whole argument. It makes a direct link, a straight line, from the serpent deceiving Eve in the garden, all the way to the spiritual dangers we face today. And notice that key word there, cunning. The original Greek suggests something really clever, a subtle kind of trickery. This really lays it out, doesn't it? On one hand, you've got Eve. She's deceived by this cunning trick and led away from one simple, clear instruction. On the other hand, you've got the modern believer. The warning is that their mind can be corrupted in the same way, pulling them away from a pure and simple devotion. The sermon's point is powerful. The playbook hasn't changed. So that's the ancient blueprint, but how does it look today? Well, this is where the sermon gets really specific, pointing out what it calls modern-day threats that are corrupting the church, not from the outside, but from within. The sermon flags these 3 massive warnings from 2 Corinthians, and the key takeaway is that deception often looks almost right, but it's just off. We're talking about preaching a different Jesus than the one in the Bible, or receiving a different spirit than the one you're supposed to, or accepting a completely different gospel from the one you first heard. So who's behind this? Who's spreading these distorted messages? The sermon points right to this passage. The Bible calls them false apostles, deceitful workers who are basically masquerading as the real deal. The speaker even calls them super apostles, which really paints a picture, doesn't it? And this is a really crucial point. This corruption isn't just about getting the theology wrong. The source says it's also about bringing worldly methods into the church. It even gets specific, calling out things like NLP, that's neuro-linguistic programming, as a tool of manipulation. You know, using human wisdom and psychological tricks to sway people instead of just relying on spiritual truth. Okay, so we've seen the problem and how it shows up today. But what's the solution? The sermon doesn't leave us hanging. It lays out a clear 3-part antidote to all this corruption we've been talking about. And the path back is actually pretty straightforward, but it's definitely an active one. Step 1, shed the old self. You've got to consciously abandon those old, corrupt ways of thinking, what Ephesians calls a life corrupted by deceit. Step 2, check everything with the scriptures. Be like the Bereans, you know? Test every single teaching you hear against the source text. And step 3, seek pure devotion. The goal is a commitment to Christ that is sincere, unmixed, and totally complete. So, that brings us to the final, big question the sermon leaves us with. In our world today, which is just getting more and more complex, with a million messages screaming for our attention, what does it really require to hold on to a sincere and pure devotion? What does it take to keep your faith simple and uncorrupted? That's the challenge, and it's something worth thinking about.